Everything's pretty quiet on the recruitment front for Kentucky basketball, but I think we have reason to believe that the Wildcats are in pretty good standing with both Chaz Lanier and Jaxson Robinson.
You are Locked On Kentucky, your daily podcast on the Kentucky Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, what's going on, Big Blue Nation? Welcome on into Locked On Kentucky, your daily Kentucky Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Lance Dawe, and on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky, we are going to be discussing the latest surrounding Jaxson Robinson, a transfer portal player from BYU that is yet to pull out of the NBA draft. What are we hearing from various reports about Robinson? I think it's all good news. Also on today's episode, we're going to be answering the question, what will Kentucky basketball do if they don't get Chaz Lanier? I'm going to go through the players that could potentially step up for Kentucky at the shooting guard spot. I think the Wildcats have a number of players on the roster that could do so. And then to wrap up today's episode, we're going to talk about Kaden Boozer, who said that he wants to hear from Mark Pope in Kentucky basketball soon. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more, and right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. You can visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Thank you so much for making Locked On Kentucky your first listen every single day. Want to remind everyone out there that we are free and available on all platforms. If you are watching on YouTube, I would greatly appreciate it if you subscribed to the show, and if you are listening on podcast, I would also appreciate it if you subscribed there as well. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. As far as I am concerned, I think Kentucky basketball is in good standing with both of their top two prospects until we hear otherwise. Chaz Lanier of North Florida and Jaxson Robinson of BYU, who is currently in the NBA draft, has not pulled out of the draft yet, I should say. According to a BYU beat writer, a big-time BYU beat writer, Benjamin Criddle, that's just an incredible last name, hosts an ESPN radio show out in Provo, recently had on a Utah Jazz reporter of the Deseret News, Sarah Todd, both of these people, legitimate sources. He had her on his radio show, and she talked a little bit about Jaxson Robinson and his relationship with Kentucky head coach Mark Pope, and then the potential decision for Robinson to come back and play college basketball. This is what Sarah had to say about Jaxson Robinson, and this is coming from Benjamin Criddle, who does the radio show that she talked about this on. She said, for Jaxson, in just talking with him, he talks to Mark Pope on a really regular basis, nearly every day. Mark Pope has already been pitching him, and he's pretty respectful about it, but there's an understanding that he knows Pope wants him. There was not any indication from Jaxson that he's talking to anybody else as regularly, including Kevin Young and BYU. There are just no conversations that are being had. I don't think that it's going to be based on any sort of NIL money or something garnered that way. I think that this is going to be based on what he thinks his best chances are, and then outside of that, if he ends up going back to the collegiate ranks, it's going to be based on familiarity. That is coming again from Sarah Todd, a Utah Jazz beat reporter, also writer for the Deseret News, Benjamin Criddle, his ESPN radio show out in Provo. That conversation coming from those two sources there. I think this spells nothing but positive things for the Kentucky Wildcats about the fact that Mark Pope is continuing to kind of establish that relationship further with Jaxson Robinson, letting him know that, hey, I am still going to recruit you. I want you to come play for me. While Robinson is trying to make what is going to end up being a very tough decision as to whether or not he pulls out of the 2024 NBA draft. Kentucky wants Robinson. I think it's pretty clear. We want Robinson as fans and as spectators of the program. I think that he would be the perfect thing that Kentucky needs at power forward as far as scoring goes and as far as just needing another player at that 4 spot. Could Robinson slide up to the 3? Yes. And I've read some of the comments recently talking about, why Robinson would play the 3 or the 4, because a couple of you have had questions about that. The reason that I say Robinson would be playing at power forward for the Wildcats is because that's where he primarily played at BYU. He came off the bench and played at power forward the majority of the time, according to KenPom. And in fact, the most frequent lineups for the Cougars this past season included Robinson at that 4 spot, or Noah Waterman at that power forward spot with Robinson out of the rotation. There was a decent portion of playing time dedicated to Robinson at the 3, but I think because Kentucky has a couple of different options, Otega Owe, Koby Brea, Trent Noah, because they have so many different options that could play small forward, I think that you would realistically want to slide Robinson down to power forward, because I think that's what he's most familiar with. Got players that will fill other positions elsewhere that Robinson could slide up to, at least for the moment. I think that right now, all things considered, whether Robinson, where Robinson stands right now, I don't know. But just hearing that report that Mark Pope continuing to establish that relationship, and there is no indication that, Jaxson is talking with anybody at BYU, Kevin Young, anybody within that program. There's nobody else really out here looking to land Robinson, at least that we know of, outside of Kansas maybe. But it's very clear, according to this report, that Robinson, if he does come back to college, he will be looking for something familiar, i.e. Mark Pope, more than likely. There's a very interesting piece here from CBS Sports' Kyle Boone. He was writing an article recently about, the biggest stay or go decisions for college basketball is whether or not they stay in the NBA draft as to whether or not they leave. He talked a little bit about Jaxson Robinson, and Boone believes that Robinson should return to school. Here's a quote from this article, again from CBS Sports and Kyle Boone. He said, Robinson had a career at BYU last season, averaging a career-high 14.2 points per game, shooting 35.4% from three-point range, and Mark Pope's run-and-gun offense. He's since been linked to Kentucky, with Pope now coaching the Wildcats. That might be a viable path for him after he showed off his smooth shooting stroke, but by and large blended into the crowd somewhere else during the week in Chicago. NBA Combine being held at Chicago this past week. Legitimately tough decision to return to school and challenge to be an all-conference player, or hope to scoot into the second round and secure some guaranteed deal. An interesting note here from SB Nation's Kentucky website. Right now, Robinson, if he does stay in the draft, more than likely going to be a late second-round pick. The minimum salary for a first-year player in the NBA this season was $1.12 million. And then a fun little tidbit here from SB Nation. Former Kentucky forward Chris Livingston, the final pick in this year's last year's draft, signed a 4-year, $7,600,000 contract with the Milwaukee Bucks, including over $3 million in guaranteed money. That's the kind of deal Robinson would be looking at if he gets drafted. That's very, very, very difficult to pass up if you're Robinson, but also at the same time, you're kind of expecting to be drafted at that point. And I really don't know where Robinson's going to head with this. If he does return to college, I would feel very comfortable with saying that Kentucky would easily be the favorite and would more than likely end up landing him if he does return to college. Because again, like Sarah said, it's hard to believe that NIL is going to be a major factor here. How much money is Kentucky going to offer to Robinson to begin with, especially if they get Chaz Lanier? I'm not sure. It's going to be fascinating to see how it works out with just different things pushing and pulling in this news cycle. But it's very difficult to pass up $3 million guaranteed, but you have to know at that point that Robinson is getting drafted. Personally, if I had to pick, and I'm not just trying to be optimistic here, I would say that there is more than a 50% chance that Jaxson Robinson does return to college. I wouldn't say that it's much past 50%. I would just lean that way slightly, just based on what we've seen, based on what we've read. And if that does happen, I would feel very confident with Kentucky's chances to land him. So that's the update on Jaxson Robinson. about how he is continuing to establish connection with Mark Pope, and he hasn't really been doing that with anybody else. So let me know what you think about Robinson in the comments below. Let me know if you think that he will end up staying in the NBA draft, going back to college, and if he does end up at Kentucky. All right, I want to answer the question on today's episode: what will the Wildcats do if Chaz Lanier does not commit to UK, if he ends up committing elsewhere, BYU, Tennessee, or somewhere else? I want to dive into that in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at Yahoo Finance. Wouldn't it be great if you could see all of your investment and retirement accounts in one place? Well, with Yahoo Finance, you can consolidate your views from multiple accounts into one hub and access the expert analysis you need to tend to your entire portfolio with confidence. For more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you are looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data you need in one place. They are the #1 finance destination, including producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst ratings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor over at yahoofinance.com. The #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. Again, that is yahoofinance.com. All right, continuing along here on the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you. Again, I really appreciate you guys checking out the show today. If you have not subscribed to the YouTube channel or the podcast feed, I would greatly appreciate it if you did so. And if you want to go over to my Twitter, at Locked On UK on Twitter, you can throw a follow there. If you have any questions about what's coming up with Kentucky basketball, you can leave those in the YouTube comments below or hit me there at LanceDawe_ on Twitter is where you can find the link to join the Locked On Kentucky Discord. It's a free place to go and chat about everything happening with Kentucky athletics. It's not an insider Discord. It's just a place for us to kind of hang out and chat. All right, so we've talked about Jaxson Robinson, about how I feel like Kentucky's in a pretty good spot right now, especially if Robinson does return to college. And there's another prospect, obviously, that the Wildcats are looking at that they really, really want to get. Chaz Lanier. Everything's extremely quiet on the Chaz Lanier front right now. Literally nobody knows what's going on, including college basketball insiders like Trilly Donovan. They are reaching for different sorts of information that they could pull out of this situation from their sources. They being different insiders that actually know what's going on. People at On3, people at Rivals, people at KSR, people like Trilly Donovan. And I believe Trilly put on his Discord earlier today that he has people from different teams that are pursuing Lanier asking what the latest updates are, and he doesn't know. So if he doesn't know and they don't know, nobody knows what's going on. So all that to say, just be careful with what you read online and whether or not you choose to believe it, if there's any legitimacy to it right now. As of May 23rd, in the afternoon of May 23rd, nobody really knows what's going to happen with Chaz Lanier. So let's say, hypothetically, Lanier goes to Tennessee, or he goes to BYU, one of the two, or he magically goes to some other random school like Sacramento State, or just something random out there that I wanted to throw out there. What will the Wildcats do at that shooting guard spot? I think that they have several options that they could look at to kind of either collectively remake the production that they want out of Lanier, just essentially scoring the basketball. Or I think they have a couple of options that could kind of turn into wild card prospects that could really show out, even though right now on paper, they're not expected to produce at such a high level. And I think that there's going to be some pushback on, if Kentucky doesn't get Lanier and they end up just kind of settling at that shooting guard spot, there's going to be some pushback about, Kentucky lacks depth there or something to that effect. I would disagree with that because Kentucky right now, I think, has 6 legitimate different players that they could put at that shooting guard spot. 7 if you want to account for a point guard that has done nothing but play point guard his entire life. The Wildcats have options. And I think that if you look at players like Reed Sheppard from a season ago, nobody really expected him to turn into anything special in the backcourt, and he was arguably Kentucky's most valuable player. Also, statistically, their most efficient shooter. and a massive fan favorite. And at this point last year, nobody expected Reed Sheppard to do anything. So there's a number of players, both freshmen and transfer portal prospects, that I think could turn into a Reed Sheppard-like player in terms of, like producing beyond the current expectations. So, who are the players that Kentucky could turn to at that shooting guard spot? I think I'm going to go down the list here, and I'm just going to break down from top to bottom the most likely candidates to play at that shooting guard spot or start there at the very least. I think Koby Brea is your first option. Statistically, in terms of effective field goal percentage, the best shooter in college basketball a season ago. Just insane what he was able to do from beyond the arc and inside the arc, especially at the rim. Just a great shooter. What happens if you give him more volume? Does the efficiency take a couple of notches? Does it go down a couple of notches? Maybe, but even if it goes down a couple of notches, he'd still be an insane shooter. He has size at 6'6". He has primarily played small forward during his time at Dayton, but he also played a little bit at shooting guard. So I think that Kentucky could work him in there comfortably if they want to. He's a veteran. He very may well end up starting. Even if Kentucky doesn't get Chaz, I think that may be where Kentucky just turns if they go to Koby and in the backcourt instead of having him play at small forward. So I think Koby would be the most likely candidate to take that spot. The second player that I have here may surprise some of you. I think Collin Chandler would be next in line. Chandler, at 21 years old, coming into the Kentucky program as a freshman, I think is probably the biggest wild card on the roster this upcoming season. He was a really fun scorer in college, a high-flying, aggressive, passionate basketball player who can score the rock in a variety of ways. And I think that Kentucky very may well turn to, if they don't get Lanier, Brea and Chandler as your two primary players at that shooting guard position. I think Chandler could handle it. I think that he may potentially blossom into something way better than we expect him to be this upcoming season, just because he may get more minutes than we expect. Even though he's a freshman, he's got some age to him. He's definitely grown and developed. And I think that while it may take some time during this offseason to kind of get some things going and get back into the swing of things, I think Collin Chandler is an underrated pickup for Kentucky basketball. And I think that if push comes to shove, he's your number 2 guy at the number 2 spot. Otega Dawe would be my third player here, and I don't necessarily know if this is a phenomenal fit, but Dawe played a small forward and a little bit of power forward during his time at Oklahoma. At 6'5", with a decent three-point shot, I think you could slide him up to the 2. Him and Butler in the backcourt would just be an insane defensive tandem. Is that what Kentucky wants to do? I'm not sure, but he would be my third guy to potentially start at shooting guard. Travis Perry would be my fourth player here. I think that because of his shooting, because of his IQ, he'd be my fourth guy here. Kerr Kriisa would be my fifth player here, but the reason that he's underneath Perry is because Kriisa, his entire career, has done nothing but play point guard for Arizona and West Virginia. My expectation is it stays that way with Mark Pope and company with the Wildcats this fall. I think that he's going to be a point guard, backup point guard for the Wildcats. I don't see him playing a ton off ball, maybe a little bit, but I think that he's going to be a point guard. Trent Noah would be another prospect that you could throw in here at that shooting guard spot, even though Noah at 6'6" with a good three-point shot will probably play wing. I don't know if he's going to play a ton this year, but I'm sure that he will be able to get some playing time next season, especially once the roster kind of shakes out. Some of these older players graduate and leave. Kentucky may want to lean on Noah a little bit more as a sophomore. And then the final player here that Kentucky could look at as a potential shooting guard is Lamont Butler. I think that the statistics, the shooting stats for Lamont Butler would not indicate that the Wildcats would want to go this direction. He's not really an effective shooter, but they could. I mean, you've got 6 other players here that I would think would fit more comfortably, so this would be just essentially a 7th option. And Butler has played point guard for his career at San Diego State, so I don't necessarily know if I would see this happening. So Brea, Chandler, Dawe, Perry, Kriisa, Noah, and Butler, 7 different players that Kentucky could put at that 2 spot. They could. How effective would it be? Let me know in the comments below or at Locked On UK on the socials. All right, I want to wrap up the show today talking a little bit about Cayden Boozer, who wants to hear from Kentucky basketball. He took a visit alongside his brother to Lexington this past September, and I think that Kentucky, with Mark Pope, could very well swing and land the 5-star point guard. Let's talk about it here in just a second. Before I do that, though, I want to tell you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. That is FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, wrapping up the Thursday edition of Locked On Kentucky. Lance Dawe hanging out here with you, trying not to sneeze on today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. That came out of nowhere, and it always happens whenever we come back from break. Kaden Boozer definitely wants to hear from Kentucky and is planning on making a decision in the fall. This report coming from KSR, Kentucky Sports Radio. You can find this over on their website. He wants to hear from Mark Pope and Kentucky basketball. Here's what KSR had to say, just to get some clarity, by the way, on him and his brother's recruitment. Kaden Boozer has done plenty to prove he's more than his dad's son or the secondary piece in a package deal with his twin brother. The conversations that previously needed to include Carlos and Cameron Boozer are now separated to highlight the 6'3" point guard out of Miami as an individual who is now up to number 16 nationally and number 3 at his position in the 2025 On3 industry ranking, one of the top playmakers in the country. You could go look over on 24/7 Sports. According to the 247 Sports Composite, number 17 player nationally, number 3 point guard, number 4 player in the state of Florida. Obviously, Duke is the front runner here, I think, to land the Boozer twins, or to at least land one of them. Florida, Kentucky, Miami, Florida State, and others also in on this recruitment. Boozer doesn't really have much else to prove at this level. He played pretty well during the EYBL circuit, averaging 12, 6.3 assists per game, 2.9 rebounds, was 9-1 with his Knight Riders elite squad. But he wants to show coaches he's a winning asset, and they should want him leading their program. So this is what Boozer had to say during the EYBL Session 3 at Indianapolis. So many different things, by the way, coming out of that session for the Kentucky Wildcats. I think very good things for the recruiting. He said this to KSR. It's a great feeling, all of these coaches being here to watch our team as individuals. It's a great feeling. I'm trying to show I'm getting better every single time they watch me play. I want to be able to prove that every time I step on the court, playmaking, defense, scoring, I'm just trying to help my team be the best they can be and help them win, which is a pretty humble statement coming from Boozer, the brother of Cameron Boozer and the son of Carlos Boozer, former Duke Blue Devil. Pretty tame statement there, just wanting to go out there and be a playmaker. And so far during his high school career, he has been exactly that. Statistically, not the best scorer, and I'm not saying that he's inefficient, but as far as what his game is, he's a playmaker. He's out there distributing the basketball to other players. I like the height at the point guard spot at 6'3". Definitely somebody that you would want to see out in transition with Mark Pope and the Kentucky Wildcats. Has a pretty solid floater game, inside game, a more physical guard, I would say, just in terms of his build. 6'3", 190. He looks bigger than that, and I think that he would be somebody that would fit well as far as individual talent with Mark Pope. Collect inside a collective unit. I think he would be a great assist man, especially to pair up with a lethal big or a stretch 5 big or somebody that can pass. Boozer would be super fun, which is why he's been super fun to watch with his brother, who plays further down low. Obviously, we all know Carlos, his dad, were playing at Duke. North Carolina is a team that is apparently in the running for Boozer, alongside Arkansas and John Calipari, according to KSR. And KSR talks a little bit about where things stand with the Wildcats. They were seen as a dark horse contender to land the Twins before. Things were a bit cold during the coaching change, and according to KSR, with the dust settling a little bit, Boozer is interested in hearing Pope and Kentucky out, certainly with familiarity there in Lexington after getting a lay of the land during his official visit, again, back in September. This is what Boozer said verbatim to KSR. Definitely want to hear from the Wildcats. Kentucky is a winning program that has won 8 national championships. That's a winning program. My visit was when Coach Cal was there, but the facilities were amazing. If they reached out, I'd definitely be interested for sure. That starts, obviously, with a potential follow-up visit to kind of see kind of what's going on with Mark Pope and company during their kind of reassessment. I wouldn't necessarily say rebuild in Lexington, new culture, as KSR says. He said it's going to be a little bit complicated, Boozer does, with visits, though, and the AAU schedule he's playing with Team USA in June. So you'd like to see a decision coming a visit coming before his decision, which he says he wants to do it before the school season starts, like the high school season. He said he has no idea how he's going to announce it. He just knows he wants to do it before the season starts. So Kentucky is going to try and have to make some moves here alongside Duke, UNC, Miami, Florida, Arkansas, Florida State. There's going to be a ton of moving and shaking, I think, with Boozer and just kind of where he goes. Just for context, by the way, he has not taken an official visit with anybody since Duke back in November 10th of last year. So a lot of silence from Boozer during this kind of interesting period with Kentucky basketball, but also silence with a bunch of other programs in terms of actually going and seeing them and interacting with them in person. How this all shakes out, I'm not sure, but a top 20 player, a 5-star point guard, a son of a former Duke and NBA great, Kaden Boozer, a player I think Kentucky basketball definitely wants to interact with now that they know that he is interested in talking to them. Be curious if Kentucky can make a move here. Mark Pope's first 5-star signing to this team is going to be very, very fun to talk about, I think, because a lot of people are currently skeptical of whether or not Mark Pope can truly recruit. I think he's going to be able to at Kentucky. Let me know what you think about Boozer in the comments below, as well as Kentucky's ability to recruit, if you have any thoughts on that. All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Kentucky. You can follow the show on Twitter at LockedOnUK. You can follow me on Twitter at LanceDahl_, and you can follow the show over on Instagram. That is at Kentucky Podcast. Any questions, comments, concerns, leave those in the YouTube comments below. Hit me on the socials. I will see you all tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Kentucky. Hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and God bless.